And this is what the legacy, to what we owe the legacy of wonderful architecture, expressed most fundamentally in Parque Central in La Habana, of these two buildings opposite each other. They were social clubs of Spanish societies back then, competing in architecture to demonstrate their wealth. I'm more wealthy than you, the Galicians. In this case, now the wonderful Alicia Alonso Gran Teatro in Havana, beautifully restored of late. But it was a colony. And José Martí, who you already met, is the one who came ashore at Cajababo in 1895 to launch revolution, decided to do so after 16 years of exile for treason, and he did a remarkable thing. Cubans, this is interesting. I want Rosalia's perspective after I say this, because Cubans are never taught this perspective. He committed suicide. He martyred himself in the first battle to become the first victim. Right? They're not told that he committed suicide. That's exactly what he did. The leader of the independence movement on a white horse, protected by bodyguards, to the rear of General Maximo Gomez's army, on sighting the Spanish forces, charges through his own army to the Spanish army and is shot through the neck and is killed. That is martyrdom. It is, the other word is suicide. And he had said, to live for the fatherland, to die for the fatherland is to live forever. He set the example. And then, of course, Cuba was on the verge, after 3 years of brutal war, of independence. And what happens? The USS Maine is sent to Cuba and explodes in the harbor and is used purposefully as a pretext for the USA to declare war on Spain. This has been a big desire. We had tried to purchase Cuba on 3 occasions from Spain. We coveted Cuba, and the Spanish-American War was a good pretext for that. And so Cuba was denied its independence. America took control and was administered for 4 years by the US military, and then a colony was put in place. I forgot I got this slide. You all know Teddy Roosevelt leading the charge of the Rough Riders on the cavalry. Never happened. No cavalry ever involved. Because we write, the victors always write the history books. Teddy was the only one on horse. No cavalry. But anyway, that was at Santiago in the Spanish-American War. And of course, during this period, America was fine, because it was fine for us economically to support people like Batista, a thug hoodlum who, for his second term in office, did a deal with the mob so the mob could come in and set up shop. And this is who ran Cuba. The United Fruit Company, which was not a philanthropic organization, folks. Meyer Lansky and Co. And we were fine with this because it was good for business. So this is what the tourists saw. But this is what they didn't necessarily see. In Havana, right next to the casinos, the huge, vast homelessness and impoverishment of the country. And of course, it was the equivalent of Bangkok after the Vietnam War back then. It was the sex trade center of the world, and that seemed fine, except for one young man, Fidel Castro, right, a lawyer, who, adopting José Martí's positions on these things, was determined to change things. And he stood for Congress. He was the rising star in the early 50s, stood as a congressional rep, and was denied the possibility of serving in Congress. There are absolutely no doubt, given his personality, that he would have served term in Congress, become a senator, and I have no doubt he would have been elected president in a democratic way. But Batista wanted legitimacy, put himself up for election in the same election, and when it was obvious he wasn't going to win, cancelled the election, and this young man, who could have been elected president, chose Plan B. Revolution. Did so with an attack in 1959 on the Moncada barracks, a suicidal attack from which he and his young brother, 21-year-old Raul, were lucky to escape with their lives. And did you know they were sentenced to 15 years in prison? This is where they served almost 2 years before public, popular support for Fidel had him released. They were released from prison. They would have been assassinated on the streets of Havana, so they left for Mexico, met Che, trained the rebel army, came back on the Granma. Only 17 survivors out of 82 men on that ship. Fidel and Raul again and Che escaped with their lives. And it is remarkable, folks, from this place, Fidel's headquarters, the highest part of the mountains and the furthest part of Havana, that from here he managed to topple Batista within 2 years with popular support. And one of the things, I don't know, remember where I am, I'm closing down. One of the things he was going to clean up, which he did, were the casinos. They were closed almost overnight. The sex clubs, the live sex shows, the brothels, prostitutes re-educated. That was all closed down, including the cabarets. And what was interesting, the cabarets are part of popular Cuban culture. And there was a reaction against that. The Cubans demanded that their cabarets be reopened. And so they were. And to this day, one of the, in fact, I'd say, save it for the last night, so it gives me a good entree segue to close down right now. You close with a visit to the Tropicana, still using the 1950s stage set, 200 performers, open air, they're up in the trees. It's fantastic. And I'll close with an anecdote. This is my girlfriend, Mercedes. She was a showgirl at the Tropicana, close friends to this day. We were together for 5 years. And the first date with her expresses better than anything else I can say here why I so love Cuba and why Cuba is so remarkable. The full story is in my book about motorcycling. So I go to pick her up after the show, first date, and this is how I'd seen her in the show. And she comes out after the show and she is dressed entirely in white, white turban, shaved her head, all these colorful bangles. I realize, oh my God, she's a Santera. And she has just been initiated as a Santera in a secret ceremony that includes goat and chicken sacrifice, blood in her hair, etc. And she is considered sacred by Cubans. You cannot touch a Santera, a Santero, right? Cubans will honor this. She is sacred. The Orisha is living inside her body at this time. This is my first date. This is going to be an interesting first date. And we hail, this is the special period, there are no lights in Havana back then. We hail this 1950s taxi, and we are stopped by a policeman off Infanta, and he jumps in front of the vehicle and stops the vehicle, and I can see there's a man lying in what clearly is a pool of blood. And the policeman is commandeering the taxi to put the man in to take him to the hospital. And he hadn't seen Mercedes. And she winds down the window, sticks a white turban head out of the window and says to him in Spanish, "You can't do that. I'm Oya." Oya. And the policeman, aghast, waits the taxi on. The taxi driver floors the taxi, and I look behind me to see the policeman running down the street to look for another vehicle. I said to Mercedes, "What on earth did you tell him?" She said, I told him I was Oya. Santa Teresa, the guardian of the dead and the cemeteries, and he put an injured man in the car, I might have killed him. It's my last night in Cuba, my first date with this woman. Can you imagine the tingle that went up my spine? It is this eccentricity, this enigma, that I so love about Cuba, and that I hope you will experience with me. And if you want to learn more, self-promotion moment, here are my 3 websites that make that happen for you. So thank you very much.